Hello, I'm Finlay Johnson. I'm the COO for the Association for Electronic Music. We're the not for profit, democratically run global trade body for electronic music. We work in a way which reflects, promotes, and preserves the best of electronic music culture and brings members together as a community to highlight the solution to the issues that all our members face. We've got about 280 member companies in about 29 countries, from managers to labels, artists to tech companies, lawyers, agents, everything in between. And our strategy is really informed by our members. And we're brought together today from an idea that Graham Luckhurst, who we'll hear from in a bit, who highlighted how different members and labels are approaching the strategy of releasing music in 2024 and how we can get our music to reach our audiences and be heard above the growing number of tracks released each week and cut through the noise and get to our fan bases. So I'm going to pass over to Graham, who will be moderating today. Graham, over to you.
Thanks, Finley. Yeah, it's welcome along, everybody. I think it's a very big, very relevant conversation at the moment. It's something that's ever changing and ever shifting, but seems to be perhaps even more swift and evolving at the moment in 2024 and beyond. So, just thought it'd be good to get some heads together and for us to knock around some ideas around releasing electronic music in 2024. So, we've got Eli Fowler, who's an artist and the owner of Tech Afrique, the label, collective and events organisation. Welcome along. Anton Partridge from Good Company. Hiroki Beck from Fat Records. Jack Bridges from SoundCloud. Clara Suris from Suris Media, and Finley and myself. So we'll be talking for the next 45 minutes to 60 minutes or so around some ideas to do with releasing electronic music in 2024 and beyond. I said it's a huge subject, and it's something we're talking about a lot between ourselves at the moment, and I'm sure all the members out there and everybody that's listening are something you're very fascinated by and constantly discussing and thinking about yourself. So I'm sure that there's a lot of different types of conversation that are going to come out of this podcast, a lot of different themes. So maybe some of those we can take and deeper dive into them in the future. Also, if there's any that you would like us to discuss, then please reach out, put it in the comments, contact Finley, or as I said, leave it in the comments, and we could look at deeper dives in the future. So yeah, as I said, it's a very fragmented, fast-moving landscape, I think, electronic music at the moment. So wanted to get some different thoughts and opinions from artists, labels, management, and PR companies just as we enter 2024. And I think we wanted to start by starting at the start, really, with release strategy. What is a release in 2024? Obviously, there's so many different types of content. Now, is a release the actual long-form audio? Is a release the short-form audio? Is a release the preview? How does that manifest? But dialing it back, just looking at the kind of traditional, what is a release, and what is the strategy that we can build around those releases. So just wanted to talk to Eli and Hiroki first, basically about release strategy in a basic sense at the moment, and how you guys are looking at that with singles, is it EPs? How has that changed over the last couple of years? Has it moved more towards singles and moved more, or is it away from albums, away from EPs to faster? What kind of frequency are we looking at, and how is that working for you on a day to day in terms of workflows? Perhaps Eli, do you want to have a go at this one first?
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Eli Fowler. I'm a Nigerian-born, New York-based artist, DJ, producer. I run Tech Afrique with my co-founder, Chelsea Odufu. And Tech Afrique is a New York-based label event platform. And right now, Tech Afrique is a big corporation. We just become a big corporation. And basically, if you're not familiar with the big corp word, big corp are basically business that meets the highest standard of social and environmental, performance. Yes, to go back to your question, I would say, release. I'm gonna be speaking from an artist perspective. Releasing from my experience from last year and going into 2024, I would say it's definitely very important to be consistent in releasing music, because it's kind of like a momentum and numbers game. on these DSP platforms. Is like for an artist, for an upcoming artist, I would say like releasing at least every month is important, and maybe like even twice a month. For the established artists, maybe not really necessarily. You feel me? But for if you're an emerging artist like myself, I would say yes, releasing every month, because from what I've seen over the past years and the past couple of months, I see that the more I release, the more I get engagements on the DSPs and the streaming platform. Like the number of like followers on my Spotify increases. The algorithm also tends to work in my favor because I'm releasing consistently, and I get to get even more playlists on these platforms. Yeah, so I would say the it's important to release consistently. And what is the other question again?
So it's that's great. Like really, really interesting. Have you moved away from larger bodies of work towards more singles, for example? Are you still doing EPs? Has that changed over the last year, 2 years? Or is it now more of a focus on 1 or 2 singles a month because you're working with up and coming artists who that momentum and frequency suits? Has that shifted towards singles, away from EPs, away from albums?
From my personal experience, I would say releasing singles these days is more effective, because I feel like people's attention span these days, especially we always on our phone, very distracted with things. People's attention span is very little, and it's also like a playlist game as well. So I would say releasing singles as an artist consistently is important, but at some point as well, you want to release an EP, maybe like a 2-3 track EP, if you're an emerging and upcoming artist, because you don't want, as an artist, you don't want to put all your energy into a project like an album and no one really gets to know about the album. I feel like building momentum over the years through releasing singles consistently does help that emerging artist, and eventually maybe like 3 years or 2 years, like that, you've build sort of a clout. Is like the word clout, like you have a lot of clout in the industry. Then I feel like people are now interested in like, oh, okay, we want to check out what he got to say through an album. Except if you're an artist like Jeff Mills or like maybe Richie Houghton, for instance, you can release an album and people are, because these are established musicians, people are, or a car course, for instance, people like, okay, I want to check it out. But especially is the industry right now for me is highly competitive, and and having the structure to release like singles just makes it easier for your fans and the audience to engage with what you got going on as an artist.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think what you said there is very, very interesting. And I'm going to ask the same question to Hiroki here in line with Fabric Originals and the Fabric record labels. This strategy and this cadence of releasing changing depending on the time that you're at in your career, if it's development or whether you're more of an established artist, is definitely something that we're talking a lot more about. Hiroki, what are your thoughts on this in terms of format and strategy and timeline at the moment for established artists and developing artists?
Hi everyone, Hiroki here. Pleasure to be here. I would definitely agree that it's far easier to kind of be a bit more flexible with kind of your established artists as opposed to upcoming developing artists. I think, as Eli kind of touched upon, it's more important, especially when you're kind of trigger the algorithms and increase your kind of followers on platforms such as Spotify, that you need that kind of consistency and frequency. So, as dance labels, traditionally, the kind of traditional formats, the Club 12s and the EPs are not necessarily, well translated on digital platforms per se, where they tend to kind of favor the more single release format. So even with mid-tier artists, we're kind of finding that splitting these kind of multiple track release formats is far better served by, single by single over a longer period as well, I would say.
In terms of, in that sense, in terms of running in a project, for example, an album, are you splitting, say, a 10-track album over 4, 5, 6 singles running into an album launch and drawing the campaign out over a longer period of time?
Yeah, this all depends, because obviously Houndstooth is one of the kind of imprints that sits under the Fabric umbrella. That demographic lends itself more to the kind of album LP format, and the kind of Pitchfork Quietus readers don't really like to kind of see that spread out over a longer period of time, whereas I guess the newly established Fabric Originals, which is more kind of club focused, album formats, we released 2 albums last year, Tigerport and Red Axes. I don't think that having them single by single necessarily is, the wrong way to go. But essentially, if we're kind of wanting to establish our I guess, presence on these DSPs, then we have found that having not even announcing the album until the 4th or 5th single has kind of worked in our favour.
Right, that brings us onto the platform strategy side of things, in terms of most effective ways of reaching your audiences. And Hiroki, we can stay on this one at the moment. I think it's an interesting thing, particularly for the 2 labels you've got. What are you finding that the most engaging platforms across those labels are?
When you say platforms, do you mean DSP platforms or
specific?
Well,
I think we probably need to go wider to include socials now.
Socials.
I think across where your fans live, where your super fans live, where they're hanging out, where they're listening, where they're engaging most, is there a defined strategy for Fabric Originals, for example, versus the other labels that you're working on in terms of that platform approach at the time?
I would say so, yeah. I would say that Bandcamp is quite a key platform for Houndstooth artists. The kind of direct consumer retail space there is very much important. I think the super fans on the Houndstooth imprint are very much invested in the artists and not necessarily the label. So yeah, we see a lot of kind of sales.
Would you go there first, for example, if we're talking about windowing or releases, offering things to super fans up front? Is that something that you consider for certain releases and projects?
Absolutely, yeah. So we kind of do, like, on album release day, we'll hold listening parties, invite kind of a small segment of fans to like a pop-up show, things like that. That has tended to work really well, actually. Whereas on originals, we'll kind of focus more on other kind of DSP platforms such as Beatport, which is more obviously club focused.
And is this strategy something that you're doing more of in end of 2023, 2024 and beyond, in terms of these detailed platform strategies, windowing essentially, and really?
I think so, yeah. I think so, because I think because of how music's consumed and the consumer and fans have like a very much, it's almost like an array of riches. There's a lot of platforms. People can access music really readily these days. So we have to target each specific platform and tailor our kind of strategies to each individual one, as opposed to having like a blanket approach to things.
Anton, what are your thoughts on this from a management perspective, and what are you advising your artists to do? I just wondered what your take on.
I mean, you have to be careful not to sort of give everyone one sort of blueprint template and expect it to work for everyone. So you have to be very fluid. Or as a great example, Fisher was never, I mean, everybody sees Fisher's videos and they laugh at them, and TikTok was never a tool to really promote Fisher with before. It was like, it's there, it existed, but it never made any records go viral. And it was only last year, on the back of his and Chris Lake show at Coachella, that is the first time that platform had a real effect on his music and the desire for the tunes and the consumption for them and people ripping it. It was Take It Off and Atmosphere that they played on both weekends at Coachella. Up to then, it was never thought about as far as he's concerned, because it didn't register for him. You kind of looked at it, and whatever you do as a label, as an artist, from a management perspective, you want to set building blocks in areas that you haven't been working in or that haven't been fully effective for you. But more importantly, you really double down in the areas that you can see that your fans do resonate or the listeners do resonate. And whether or not that's TikTok, SoundCloud, actually Spotify might be the best platform, YouTube or anything like that. We build campaigns around where it's most effective, making the most of those, and then growing out of that while still trying to build areas of foundation in other platforms and other sort of social media and DSPs in any way that we can, because to the point of all of this, it's changing at such a ridiculous rate. I've never known it. Music could bubble away for a good couple of years and then come to fruition and come to the fore and spend 12 to 18 months being big and then oversaturated, and then everyone will get tired of it and it would go away. That's happening in the space of 6 months, unless, of course, it remains very underground and doesn't come to the fore.
Absolutely, yeah. The speed is crazy at the moment. And I guess almost agnostic of genre, agnostic of artists, these things can pop off and happen for any different artist or any different genre within electronic music at any different time in any different space. So I guess kind of monitoring that and how we manage that and amplify that at the right time day to day is really key here, I think. Jack,
yeah, because that's what we're...
Sorry, Anton. Go ahead.
You just used a word that I think is critical in a lot of what all of us do. And it's to, put the artist first, put the creative decisions first, and amplify what is best about them and what is the best source for them. If you start trying to just take them off on a course that they've never been on before, you're soon going to come to a very sticky end. So
in terms of release strategy, we have to be very, very fluid, cross-territory, cross-campaign, cross-platform. It's almost the point where it's becoming bespoke for every project potentially now.
Yeah, for sure.
It certainly feels like it's heading more and more towards that. Jack, from SoundCloud perspective, you're seeing records be broken a lot now on platform, and something you flagged earlier today, which was extremely interesting. There are a number of users who are only using SoundCloud. Now, this is something that I find really, really interesting in terms of only using one platform in a world where there's a plethora of different options, and wondered if you could speak to that, because it's a really interesting point.
Yeah, absolutely. On SoundCloud, specifically when we're talking about kind of unique users who only use SoundCloud as their music app, it's kind of more leaning towards a very younger demographic who SoundCloud is their sort of first dedicated music or audio app. Very low barrier to entry, doesn't require sort of credit card, take out a subscription trial. And it's also the place where artists or labels, starting out with release number one are most likely to upload their content. Again, low barrier to upload and to release. And so, yes, in the US, 14% of SoundCloud users are only using SoundCloud. And then in the UK, it's 19%, and in Germany, 20%. So there's millions of unique users to reach, that are in the three of the biggest kind of key territories for either breaking an artist or making a record successful. And what we're seeing really is kind of 2 to 3 different types of strategy, but they're quite goal-driven strategies when it comes to SoundCloud. Are you trying to put a new artist in front of a new audience? Are you trying to break a record to kind of get signed? Is that the kind of goal of the SoundCloud strategy? Or, what I'm doing at the moment is working with a couple of pretty high profile legacy artists who really want to change direction, and they want to kind of get the new sound in front of a new audience, and not just, these are people with millions of followers, but maybe haven't been quite as engaged, or just actually pushing a very different type of sound than they want to get in front of this really young TikTok generation. We share a big overlap in the demographic of TikTok in these territories, and we see a bit of like a ping pong effect between breaking records on each platform, and we can sort of track incoming traffic as people, young users from TikTok, having found a 30-second short form video clip, and they're looking for like a longer or the original version of that track on SoundCloud to save into their library and repeat listen to. So people are coming with a strategy that just is those two platforms, but then the longer term goal is to gain recognition, grow something on Spotify, Apple Music, etc. as well. But yeah, there's no rinse and repeat strategy anymore. It's really coming to the table with some fresh ideas that are a bit outside of the box, that do engage with audiences on social platforms as well as music platforms, but to have some sort of differentiated strategy for each platform without going to, not looking at like 15 to 20 different campaigns for 15 to 20 different platforms, but bucketing social, having some overlap with DSP, and breaking out Bandcamp and Beatport probably separately as well, because they're their own kind of customer base purchase habits as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the short form, do you see people releasing shorter versions on SoundCloud to match TikTok, or is there any parity with that, or are they using longer versions on SoundCloud and short form on TikTok? Obviously, we've got YouTube Shorts in the mix here as well. Essentially, going back to what I said at the beginning, in terms of formats, the long form audio can come quite a long way down the chain here.
Totally.
So yeah, just any thoughts on that?
I mean, we've typically been a place where we've, for streaming, I've encouraged artists and labels to upload full-length tracks, because there's a big DJ audience as well who are using the platform to create, dig, and discover new records or new releases from established labels, and they want to hear them in that kind of DJ-friendly format. And so we do see high consumption of longer form content. But in the traditional kind of commercial space, those tracks have got shorter. But what we're seeing at the moment, which is quite sort of SoundCloud specific, is releasing kind of clips, which was sort of popular 5 to 10 years ago on SoundCloud. But the difference now is that those clips are being replaced with the radio edit or the full-length version on release date. So they're heavily pushing a clip or a teaser of their release. It could be 24 hours right up to 2 weeks in advance, having that on TikTok. Once you're seeing something work on TikTok, you need to have something on SoundCloud, because otherwise you're getting traffic that's just going to a dead end, is going to consume someone else's content. So that's kind of a big takeaway, I think, is if you're seeing it pop off on social media, there's an element, or just having a version of a discoverable version of that track on SoundCloud can make all the difference between the number of plays that you get on release date. Could already be at 100,000 versus other records out that day that are starting at 0.
Jack, on the technical point there, did you say you can swap the audio off of a short version to a longer version?
Yes, I mean, not in a very really sort of smooth supply chain delivery at the moment, but it's something that we're working on. But we've worked with partners to help facilitate that. And if you're in control of your own account and manually uploading music, you can just upload a preview, and then on release date, it's a feature of the subscription to be able to replace the master audio, so you can just flip it out to the full-length version, retaining all of your plays and social engagements that you've built up over the sort of pre-release campaign. So it is kind of going back to some of the traditional methods of really kind of pulling back the catapult to sort of build up and drive momentum to release date, rather than just starting from a cold start on the focus date.
My brain's whirring. I like that one. I think that's a very, very useful takeaway.
Well, we're seeing artists from Bicep, incorporate that into their campaign. So big artists, legacy artists, right through to smaller artists who are kind of using that very effectively in their own little environment. But what we're getting better at is looking at the data and seeing what's worked on the platform and how records have blown up, and plotting the different kind of key milestones of a release or a campaign and matching it to what's happening on other platforms. And in some cases, there's no campaign at all. It's just that a record just blows up, or it gets a radio play, and then it gets the interest of A&R people and ultimately gets signed. But there are lots of cases where that track has existed on SoundCloud for up to a year or more in its original format before getting signed and then released and going on to be massively successful elsewhere as well.
Amazing. Well, thanks for all the answers there. There's a lot to digest, as I thought there would be. So, yeah, I mean, reviewing the landscape in advance, potentially a way to approach this, looking at where the artist is in their career, what you want to achieve, and amplifying and being reactive to what happens. Yeah, there's many useful points in there. So thank you very much. Clara, I wanted to, in terms of what we've just been talking about, obviously it's quite a departure from the traditional, here's an album, let's put it in front of some media and PR. So really interested to know what your thoughts and feelings are on how PR campaigns are best handled now, given this scenario that we're faced with dance and electronic music here. Is it short form? Is it long form? Is it a single? Are we doing 5 singles and 8 weeks apart, and then we're doing an album in 9 months' time? What are you feeling is working for you at the moment?
I mean, it really varies considerably from artist to artist, the type of music, the size of the campaign. I mean, we work across campaigns from everybody from like Danny Tenagle's recent Global Underground, a lot of the other compilations like Balance, Henry Size, to more up-and-coming artists, self-released artists, right across the board, really. And what works for one obviously doesn't necessarily work for the other, and also across different genres as well. What we're finding in terms of releases is certainly people tend to be sort of 4 to 6 weeks, I'd say, for us, for EPs and singles. But what we're finding the most, for example, I think we touched upon this earlier, for an album campaign, we are finding that more people are releasing 3 to 4 separate singles ahead of an album campaign, just to keep interest going and really building up to it. And often, as mentioned before, not actually announcing this is part of the big album campaign until maybe single 3. So single 1's a bit of a something's coming, and then single 2 sort of keeps that building, and then 3, wham, we've got the album coming out 4 just beforehand. But I think what we've touched on is, because there's so many different platforms, so many different opportunities now, but yet in terms of journalists, there's fewer, and everyone's trying, with more music than ever being released, we have to be extremely creative. So I think it's a case of looking at each platform and seeing how best we can utilize it, but also being extremely creative, and just putting a single out and saying, here's the music, and going to a press and saying, here's a track, even if it is the best track ever made. It's hard, unless it's, like we said, a sort of Bicep, Jeff Mills type person. It's going to be tough. So it's all about telling the story, and that's why when I'm working with artists, I tend to move away from just a one-off campaign, unless it is, you know, your sort of A-list artist, a legacy release, something like that. And it's all about the sort of full campaign, about what else they have coming up.
I know that aligns with what DSPs in terms of editorial are looking for as well. They're looking for stories increasingly so. So yeah, that tallies. And one thing I wanted to talk about specifically is this notion of when, in terms of an impact date. And is it possible for PR to go post-release? So a single drops. Obviously, when we're talking about the streaming landscape, the bulk of the streams are actually going to come way past release date. Are news outlets, media outlets, music industry press, if something is already out but hasn't had a PR campaign activated on it, are they less likely to be interested in it? Say, for example, it's come out, something's blown up on a social or touring, it might have been out for 2 years, and then the PR campaign is activated. Is that something that you're seeing? Is it something that you advise against, or what are your thoughts there?
It is something we're seeing a bit of. I mean, in terms of, using an example of something that's already been out, so for example, like a B-side, and then maybe we found it's blown up, it's really, the numbers are really starting to build nicely. Quite often what we'll do is, say, try and include it as part of an EP or something, or do a remix of it, or do a reworking of it. I mean, for example, Sharam, who we work with, is obviously doing 15-year anniversaries of things like some of his tracks as well, and like house music that was released in December. So I think it's a way. I mean, there's a lot of sort of reworkings of tracks or 2.0 versions that people are doing, just to kind of almost like, here's the new version of it, but also listen to the old version of it and just keep the story going. In terms of keeping, I mean, I do still pitch older tracks to press. Obviously, if it was just around that campaign, you know, obviously, if it's purely on that release, it would then need to hook it on something else. Like, for example, a forthcoming tour, wider activity that they're doing, obviously forthcoming release. And quite often in that case, we'd more look at things like interviews, guest mixes, playlists, rather than just a news story. And to be honest, press aren't really that interested just straight up news or even reviews. There's so few places covering it now. It's just a rubbish copy and paste thing, which people don't read, you know, because it's all about building engagement. What people want is that unique content. So, you know, doing something sort of creative video content with the artists as well, you know, really trying to boost that. And in terms of track which is already out and how to promote it, I mean, obviously Instagram, you know, getting good Instagram footage of either that artist or another big name playing it somewhere, you know, somewhere that looks glamorous and sunny, and like where we are, we'll probably right, most of us are right now. You know, things like that is a good way of helping to build that track rather than just putting it out as a news story, which is just going to be ignored, really.
Eli and Anton, I just wondered if you had any input on this notion of post-release promotion on working tracks essentially already out. Had any thoughts or examples of projects that worked?
Yeah, I mean, go on, Eli. You go first.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, actually, a lot of campaigns at the moment are all about the post push, because the way the landscape. Well, actually, there's a lot of pre, but that's not what we're talking about right now. We'll probably talk about that a bit later. But as far as in regards to the sort of post activation for any kind of pushes on any campaign, whether or not it's a single or an album, because the current landscape, what used to take you 2 months to get to your impact date, if you're dealing with something that is not necessarily OCC based, but you're looking for your peak number on streams basis, it's sort of taking 3 or 4 at the moment. And so you have to long out this campaign, and you can't burn through your content, and you can't say everything in the first 2 or 3 weeks and then be left to sort of scratch your head and think, what the hell do we do now, because this is still moving and we've burnt everything that we've got. So you kind of look at it accordingly. Like I say, there used to be a lot post that would sort of probably last up to 2 months, and then the record would take on a life of its own, and you've got it to a certain point and it's moving. Getting it to that point to take a life of its own is taking longer. So you really do have to sort of weigh up what you're doing, when you're doing it, and how effective. You need to keep the story going, but you don't want to sort of drop your most effective asset in any form, whether or not that's a spend, a bit of content, or whatever else, too early when your record's still only halfway up the curve, and radio are doing this and streaming are doing that, and you're just trying to desperately pull everything together to align that it all goes at the same time and can kind of hit a point that, okay, it all makes sense now.
Absolutely. So the weighting essentially from pre-release campaign, post-release campaign is much more evenly spread. But it has to be fluid and it has to move, and we have to respond to that. But I think back in the day, it was much more pre, and there was actually not that much going on post-release. And now I think we have to be much more responsive. And yeah, I think it definitely differs across campaign and across artists. But I think, saving, as you said, Anton, saving things, keeping them in your back pocket for in case something does go post-release is very, very important.
I mean, to contradict myself ever so slightly, which I have tendencies to do, I am not a fan of on-air, on-sale when it comes to dance music. I think it's been one of the biggest detrimental factors for the electronic industry and for artists for ages. So as much as there is post-campaign, we will spend months pre-release date. We will put something out either in the clubs or on one platform only that's most appropriate for the record, build a story through that, bring its time true. And so that when you come out day one, you're not sort of like trying to do everything all at the same time and trying to create a story. And you had to come out with some kind of ammo. And you can't do that if you don't do anything before. And we're going earlier and earlier, whether or not that's on TikTok, in club, on SoundCloud, all of it's, we're doing a lot before now, far more than we ever used to because of on air, on sale.
Amazing, thanks. Eli, what are your thoughts on this from an artist perspective?
Yeah, I do agree with what Anton is saying. It's definitely very important to like proper structure in the post release on how to release the record. In order how to promote the record. I'll also say it's important to build momentum before the record is released. Like for me, I would say like relationships are important as a DJ. I build relationship with other DJs. My peers, the higher DJs as well that are much more bigger. Like just building like a relationship with them, like sending them my records before it is released, so that way they play the records. Sometime I ask them as well, like, oh, like if you play this record, send me the video as a good asset for me to promote this record on across my social media platform, that this record is being played by this artist. For instance, I have a record coming up, and I love this platform called Trackstack. It's the platform like where you send your record and to DJs for them to listen to the music before it's released. So for instance, I sent a record through Trackstack, so and me from Kind of Music, and he heard the record, and he's been supporting the record through the Kind of Music shows for all across the world, and the record is getting momentum. So, and I'm also promoting that record across my social media platforms. So I feel like stuff like that, definitely like building momentum before the record is released is important, because it's kind of like a content game. You feel me? Like I feel like people love record, but also I feel like these days people also are interested in the personality of the DJ. Like, what is the DJ saying? Like, what is the story? People want to know the behind the scene story, like how the record was made, and that can be told effectively through like creative content post release and before release. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And Hiroki, what are you seeing work best in this landscape in terms of pre-release, release, and post-release?
I think streaming has pretty much killed the, like you say, on air, on sale. That's pretty much forced, like, where traditionally dance music started off in clubs. You don't really see that anymore. But we've kind of tried to force the issue, given your kind of quartets and your A-listers, like tracks 7, 8, 9 months in advance, with the hope that it will kind of seed into kind of filter through to I guess your mid-tier club by the next 2 quarters, really. That's the hope. So yeah, that's kind of very much guerrilla tactics that we're trying to employ to force the issue. But yeah, it is. I would say 80% of our marketing strategy is post-release.
It's going to be an evolving conversation, I think. The reason I wanted to really look at it is because I know, in terms of landing DSP editorial and an evolving playlist ecosystem that we hear a lot about in publicly available information on the Spotify for Artists YouTube channel, and all their documentation is about how to move through the playlist ecosystem. And a lot of that is to do with post-release activity. It can take 6, 12, 18, 24 months when you pair that with potential algorithmic Spotify discovery mode, for example, here, and communicating results and wins post-release through the correct channels, then you can really see tracks move. So that's why I think this keeping an eye on tracks, what's going on with them way past release date, and how the PR systems in that picture is potentially something that's very powerful. And I think we'll see more of that moving forward. I think being able to amplify activity post-release date is something that's potentially very powerful for us.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I don't, and obviously we're talking purely digital strategies here, and that's kind of like a space that obviously I suppose an institution like Fabric wants to get into more. I would say that underground music is very much still in that kind of physical arena, and a lot of our focus kind of relies on your kind of 12s and your LPs. Even on Houndstooth, the kind of left field electronic artists. Last year we released 6 albums. 3 of the albums got Pitchfork reviews, and as soon as you get that kind of news piece, I don't know if Clara will testify, but I was always kind of against PR and press, but for that kind of demographic, you get that review and you're selling 500 to 1,000 units straight away. So
yeah, same with a resident advisor review. If it's the right platform, the thing is, I mentioned as well, it's really hard to get reviews, but for things like, a lot of the labels we work with, you're kind of more, especially some of the more tastemaker, like Optimal Music type places, that is so key for them. So yeah, we do notice a huge difference. And one of the main thing they say is just get a Pitchfork or get a resident advisor review, because it makes a huge difference.
Amazing, thank you. I just wanted to touch on the notion of, when it comes to releasing and release timelines, what our feelings are in terms of self-releases, be it as an artist entity or on an artist's own label, versus releasing on record labels, and whether it's possible to interface those two and whether there are pros and cons to doing so. I guess the reason I wanted to look at that is we're talking about momentum and strategy and label timelines and resources and assets, and often when an artist signs to a label, they may get a release window which might be 6, 9, 12, 18 months ahead in the future. They want to build the momentum up themselves, or maybe release on several different labels leading into that, their own label. So I just wondered what your thoughts were on this topic, because I know it crops up again and again, and I'm sure for up-and-coming artists, they want to have this flow. As Eli said, you need to have this flow of music coming through. But how does that affect, for example, if an artist signs to Fabric Records, mm-hmm. and they also want to release their own music up and coming into that or around that, and what your thoughts were? Maybe from a label perspective, we could look at that first, Hiroki.
Yeah, sure. I've always been quite flexible on this point, to be honest. I think DJs, producers, they tend to label hop in our genre anyway. We're just about to sign a 2-album deal with this DJ, but she has her own label. She's up and coming. I think having that, like you say, that momentum and consistency is very important, especially if the release is not detracting from the artist development, whatever you're trying to release on Fabric. We're pretty open to that. I think deals these days, especially exclusive recording deals, can be tailored and customized. So yeah, I'm very much for it, as long as the management, the artist, and the label are all working in close tandem with the same kind of perspective and output.
Absolutely, I think that's the key there, is the organisation, because it is a good idea in theory, potentially, and obviously varies label to label, but it has to be managed very, very carefully. Otherwise you can compromise relationships, platforms, opportunities. Eli, is that something that you would look to do in terms of self-releasing versus releases on other labels?
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, it's all about the consistency and momentum game for even the DSPs, and the algorithm to also work in your favor. And most times, like, I've sent records to established labels, like for instance, Connected Frontline is a label that I've worked with before, and they tell me like, yo, we have our release schedule for the next 6 months, and we can't drop this record so early next year. And as an artist, I'm like, oh, like I gotta release something, like I can't wait 6-8 months to drop something. So that's why, like, for me, it's like a platform for having like my own label just gives me that flexibility to be able to, keep my audience engaged, because the people, following me on this, on the Spotify and on the, social media platform want to see that they don't want to go like 3-4 months. I haven't released anything. That doesn't really help me as an artist. So if I'm at least, if I'm releasing like one record a month, that still, help to the label releases comes out eventually. And but one thing I would say is for the big label release, I'll say, as long as, for instance, if I'm releasing on a crosstown label, for instance, I'll say for the big label release, then I would wait for for instance, if crosstown is releasing my one of my record in like in a month, I wouldn't release like 2 weeks prior to that, and maybe like a week or 2 weeks after that. I will give that a breathing room, because that's like a big label, and that label has the ability to push the record further than I can, because they have even more bigger resources to help push the record. So if you have a big release coming up on a label, I'll say like it's not ideal to release a week before that. I think you should kind of like give it like some time. Then after that, you can release on your own.
Absolutely, yeah. And I guess a lot of labels would be asking for those windows contractually anyway. If they were, the larger labels might be saying, I want 2 months either side, 3 months either side. So yeah, and I agree. I think it is a good idea if it's managed well, and it can be very beneficial. Anton, is it something that how do you handle this? Are you
I'm really for it. I mean, in certain situations, we had an act signed to Atlantic, and whilst they were, searching for the big record, and we had other records that we loved, and we're like, okay, look, whilst you're doing that, can we put these out ourselves? And they worked great, and we had Will Clark on the label, and everything that he's putting through in one vein of what he does is on All We Have Now, when we were working with him through the last few years. And then every other in between, his releases on All We Have Is Now would be every 2 months. And then in between all of those, there might be a release on Drum Code, or there might be a release on Trick. But everything was always very, the communication is always the key. It's like, look, we need a minimum of 4 weeks after from this release. We'll give you 4 weeks after. So it worked best at 4-week periods or monthly periods for releases. Because the other problem is that, you've got a maximum or a minimum of 3 weeks prior to your release before you can pitch. So if someone's coming out 2 weeks before your release, you can't pitch until that release is out. I'm talking about Spotify here. And like, if you can't pitch, that release is out. And beyond 3 weeks, if you're pitching 2 weeks in, you've lost your pitching prowess. It's gone. So, there are all of those elements to take into account. And if you explain that, and depending whether or not it's agreed that it's just a low-level club release that there isn't a big priority on, it's just a great look, and people aren't worried about pitching on it and things like that. But even then, even with records like that, I'm always very wary of not going into the pitching process, because as everything has said this afternoon, you need to feed the machine, whether or not that's with an algorithm, with releases, and with pitches constantly.
Yeah, I just want to add from a SoundCloud perspective as well that, we do, especially in this sort of independent electronic sector, see a pretty high volume of artists self-releasing or putting up an edit or a DJ mix, very much to kind of, feed the algorithm, keep the fans kind of engaged. And they don't always have, single 2, single 3, locked into deals. They are label hopping, and the whole idea of label hopping is that even for similar sounding labels, you're essentially having the label market you and your content to their sort of fairly unique audience. But you need to continue to sort of build your own audience, and not just kind of keep giving your IP away to help label brands build their audience and their following. And just to kind of add that it's not a release strategy. I mean, we are seeing like way more music being signed out in the open from music that's already just put live and is maybe only on SoundCloud, maybe on YouTube and TikTok. And they're records in some cases that labels have turned down, and the artist has, in frustration, just released it, thinking no one's going to sign it, only for it to then get proven engagement, and those labels come back to the table want to sign it, lock it into a deal, having turned it down 2 months before. We see that happen a lot, quite a lot, and big records and big artists who've got huge followings now, existed in a little bubble on SoundCloud. LF System's Afraid to Feel, which was the #1 record, was on SoundCloud for about 11 months before it actually gained enough traction to be signed and then go on to be, a hugely successful record. And Fred, again, very much, was advised that it's just sending me music in private. You're not going to learn anything about putting releases out, getting feedback from an audience. And so he then kind of came up with his own strategy of putting out a track. It's more of a challenge to himself, but a track a month for a year. And then that body of work, over 12 months became, the first album, Actual Life. And so that existed again on SoundCloud for nearly a year before getting signed. And when we've done artist education, like a big takeaway, even though it wasn't necessarily what we were trying to drive at, was that, wow, like a lot of this music is out there, and what I'm doing by keeping it very private is not actually giving anybody an idea of what I sound like. If they do land on my page, it's all, there's, 100,000 followers, there's actually no tracks on someone's page. So if you're scouting or doing A&R, you're not kind of discovering what they sound like unless you're directly being given a link in private. But now lots of artists are using SoundCloud and TikTok as a strategy to get noticed, to drive proven engagement, and that's actually what's driving sign-ins of artists who've gone on to be successful, like Casso and Kenya Grace as well.
Yeah, there's been so many...
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Anton.
I was going to say, to Jack's point, and he's going to love this bit what I'm about to say. It's like we're finding SoundCloud an incredibly great tool for upcoming and new, as well as some established things. We've got an amazing DJ from Ireland called George Feely, and everything, first 4 or 5 releases, because we've got him quite long term, it's just going to be SoundCloud, because I don't want him to disappear in this vast pit of Spotify and Apple. We'll put it up onto the socials and do that sort of thing as well. And because one of the most important things with it as a tool with SoundCloud, that as a label or as artists, is like being able to look into the back end and go, well, this person just played my record 22 times this week. I'm going to message them directly. Hey, thank you. And like that connection isn't available anywhere else. I don't even regard that sort of connectivity on TikTok or Insta or anything else like that, because that's far too passive. It's someone might like it, just press like. If you're lucky, they'll comment and that. But it's moved on. The engagement isn't as deep as what you get with SoundCloud, and how to build a proper foundation that you can engage with, and that you can find yourself in scenes with, that gravitate and pull you in, and suddenly, you know what, I never realized I was part of this, but these people have adopted me.
It is an amazing function that you guys have built for SoundCloud. And I agree with Anton. It's fascinating the way that can evolve and develop over the next few years, I think. And perhaps that is one of the key takeaways from this. We're talking about the owning relationships as super fans, and that is one of them. A potential priority mechanic for being able to do that. It's fascinating.
And yeah, just add, without kind of going into a big pitch, but it's doubling down on social elements of SoundCloud is key focus for us, and that means like building out that deep engagement, making it authentic, and making it kind of easy and fun, and kind of no barrier for the artist to be able to use their mobile phone, message a fan or reply to a fan, be able to very easily see which fans in which territories, which cities even are listening to their tracks, and actually be able to respond to that, and or even pass that data on to like a marketing team who are seeing that, well, this record's blowing up in Northern England, but not necessarily like in the south. These are territories that we can focus on, but this is also a different strategy we can look at as how to win back lapsed fans as well as the super fans. So we help artists and labels see both, not just the highly engaged, but actually the low engagement as well, because there's a whole different strategy there to what we've kind of been talking today, is actually how to win back people and lots of these users where you might have a 3 million listener following, but actually only 10% of the listener base is regularly active, and then how do you kind of capture that passive activity that's given you like a really big vanity stat, but those listeners are still around and can be captured and given the right content to hook them back in again.
Anton, if you don't mind me wheeling back a couple of minutes there. So in this example, I find this fascinating. You're just going SoundCloud for 3 singles. Am I correct then?
And socials. Well, it might be 3, it might be 5. It's like the whole question is about, no one knows him. Like his productions are excellent, but he does an odd gig here or there. It's not like his socials are blowing up with followers and engagement. So it's like the main reason being is like, I need a platform that one has adopters of new music at a very early stage that are willing to step in, regardless of what size the artist is or anything else like that. It's the ability to communicate with those people as well, and just whether or not it's a reply to a comment or a DM within there. Like Jack says, breaking down and going, right, okay, these are the other cities that we're good in. Let's put a little campaign around those. Let's make a bit more of an awareness campaign to match what's happening on there. So that, and then if you're lucky, a record blows in the meantime. It doesn't have to blow up, entirely, but if you get to a point where there are now 3 or 5 records, whatever it might be, alongside some socials, because you always need something to back it up with and go from one place to another, but then get to the point where you're like, we've got a story, there's something genuine here. And now, because of what's been happening on SoundCloud, he's had these gigs, he's doing this, he's getting some bromances from other producers. He's starting to have a peer group, and he's starting to belong somewhere. And like, that's our story. We've then got a story to tell, because without that story, it's a little bit, it's still the same approach, even when we're dealing with records that we might have only one copyright on and no option and stuff like that. I want to start it early. I want to have it here. It always goes on SoundCloud, minimum of 4 weeks up front. We test it, we promote it solely just on there, and we can get to see what the engagement is and whether or not, for the demographic that is on SoundCloud, we're shooting in the right area, or actually we should be going somewhere else. It's a fantastic litmus test, and it's an amazing story with SoundCloud, because the legitimacy killed it initially, and it only takes 5 years, I think, probably at most, for a whole new audience to have adopted it and made it something that is so incredibly relevant for artists and for labels, and as a source to find new material, and an area to find what is genuinely actually engaging.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. I think it's this notion of building finding these early adopters and super fans and really tapping in, that I'm finding more and more fascinating. And with these tools, it feels like it's something that is much more achievable than it has been previously. So yeah, it's a really, really fascinating area, I think. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to skip one of our questions and jump onto our final quickfire question to round things up. I just want to go round the room and ask quickly how you would spend, if you were going to give you $100 now and also $10,000 in terms of marketing an upcoming release in 2024, what that would look like for you. So it's $100 and $10,000, Eli. What would you do with that?
For me, the question is for me?
Yeah, we're going to go around everybody.
Okay.
So just starting with you, $100 and also $10,000.
That's kind of like a tough. That's kind of like a tough question, because you really got to be smart to know how to distribute those money. Because I would say like maybe $100. Maybe I will use it for like like maybe like a Instagram ad promo, maybe. Yeah, maybe that would good for like to promote a content on Instagram, so more people can go for it. For $1,000, I would say like there's these social media platform like the Deep Tech Minimals, the Techno and Chills, the Deep House Bible. There's another one like for Afro House feed for like Afro House music. Some of this platform they charge and some don't charge. So I would kind of like, because this platform also like, because they have like huge amounts of following, some have millions of followers, and their engagement on this platforms are also like super high. So I think it's like a good way to like using like $1,000 like across this platform is a good way to promote a record, because traditional press, as Clara said earlier, that sometimes people really don't read, so I wouldn't necessarily like promote on a traditional like press for like for an article, for instance, but like a content that will get an engagement that then will drive people back. So the actual music, I would say it's a smart way to spend the money.
Cool, all good, thank you. Anton, how about you? $100, $10,000?
$100, I'll take Danny Howard to lunch. £10,000, I'll take the whole of Radio 1 to lunch. No, 10,000 would be the combination of, depending on whether or not we've got the artist for more than just one record, a combination of a marquee campaign at the right point. I find them very effective when the record is kicking in, and it can help. There's the social media element. It's a difficult one though with social media, because I've seen in my major record company days hundreds of thousands of pounds spent on records to very little effect. You're talking about a 1% engagement if you're spending £100,000 even. That's the sort of and that's the difference. It's like trying to double down on where you're best going to spend and what the most effective return is on that spend. And to that point, that's what's going to change. I think that there is going to be far more micro marketing going on and direct to fan and spending money on merch to do this and embolden people to be ambassadors for the artist. I think just chucking, $5,000 at Meta and Insta and doing a load of sponsored ads on Insta and even boosting posts on TikTok, fairly effective, moderately effective. Do you see a spike? Unless there is already a spark and you're amplifying that spark and you're fanning the flames. It's like if you're trying to create the spark with £10,000, it's not going to get you anywhere. So I think you're going to have to spend the money far more creatively than what would normally have been done traditionally.
Amazing, thanks. Hiroki?
Yeah, I probably have to agree. $100 doesn't really get you that far, does it really? Even putting that behind one Instagram post to promote your release, you've still got to make that $100 back. Compared to the amount of people that it's going to actually reach, and they in turn have to either buy the record or stream it or whatever. But yeah, it's quite limited. Probably actually would put it behind a post, but yeah, maybe a bottle of wine for the artist. Say thanks. $1,000. I'd probably go for some sort of, I don't know, maybe some sort of visual content that would engage the artist to the fans. Maybe some filmed content for the artist, the release day, and then 10,000. I'll probably go for a whole creative suite. And by that, I mean getting like the whole array of creative assets up front for like an album campaign. So if you're going to kind of embark on like a 9-month campaign, you'd get all your photos, your visualizers, your social media assets all done by the same person or agency, just to have that kind of continuity across the entire campaign. I think it's far more effective than, like Anton says, forcing the issue behind sponsored ads, that sort of thing, that doesn't really work that well, I don't think. Yeah.
Thanks. Clara?
Hiya. Yeah, I mean, picking up on other things, I mean, basically £100 not going to get you that much. But, there's still lots of creative things you can do, and basically creativity is key. I just think chucking it behind an ad, really, do people read that? And I think, just giving a personal example, obviously we work across all different types of artists. And obviously if you're doing a big room type Armada release, drum code release, something quite EDM-y, big room techno, then yeah, there's the big Instagram channels as well, for $40, $50, you could get a couple of those. We've broken through some big artists, big tracks with that. But even for some of the more underground track releases that's just not relevant for, things like Athens of the North, Optimal Music. We went round, like it was a 7-inch record. Actually, my husband did guest vocals on it. And in December, we went round all the record shops. So that £100 could be spent on like taxis and tubes and everything. And if, taking a bottle of wine to some of these places as well, and get a photo or video content just going into these places. And you know what? They were delighted that we did it, because it's not what other people do. And just give them a bit of sweetener to make sure the records are somewhere prominent as well. For more money, the 1,000, I'd say, you'd be surprised at how few artists at all levels have good content, photos and video content. The number of times I get sent really drab photos by people and not in landscape, where you can barely see the artist. And for some people, they want that mystique, but for others, it just looks really bad for press and on social media. So I'd put it behind getting some really good photos. And if it's a new campaign, get new photos as well, please, people. And also good video content as well. Get some stuff really talking to your fans, stuff, just content to really help sell it. It doesn't have to be all singing or dancing, but just things that are a bit more creative and telling the story as well about your release. You put so much time and effort into the music, but then not to promote it properly is a crime. And actually, funnily enough, George Free's a good example, because I actually worked with him on a Shall Not Fade release, an Armada release. And the one thing that was really missing was good video content and also the tour. So we could talk about the music, but then there was always that sort of block. Just goes to show you need that whole 360 approach as well.
Great, thank you. Jack?
Yeah, I think, Clara touched on it, and Anton did as well, but like the relationship element of the music business is still really important, getting the music into the right hands, then knowing who it's coming from, so £100 could, do a bit of interesting promo or lunch, drinks, t-shirt into the hands of the right, reviewer or radio DJ. And then, getting into the world of 10,000, you can get way more creative, but it could still be badly spent in something that doesn't give you much return. And then over the last couple of weeks, we've just been doing a sort of mini tour of the UK, 8 pop-up events in 8 cities with 2 brands, Crewcast and Pull Up Recordings. And each one of these venues was either 100 to 300 capacity of basically 18 to 21-year-olds, completely packed out in there with the roster of, two labels performing at each one of these parties. And we've collectively probably spent less than 10K, but got 8 cities worth of social content created, getting, put up instantly onto TikTok and Instagram. And actually, it's better spent like that, taking parties to the communities, creating something in the local kebab shop or pizzeria. And we did one in a Blockbusters, and they all came. They all sold out within 24 hours of going online. And then from 6 till 10, you just had, like hundreds of people just constantly creating branded content for you and uploading it to social media. And that's better than we probably could have spent that money on a professional team to do a day's worth of shooting. So yeah, for even 10K or £1,000, you can get pretty creative and work with some other people to create your own scene, or do something really outside the box, actually.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a big fan of the activation spends. I really like the out of the box in real life stuff. I think it can really resonate. Amazing. Thanks to everybody for taking part today, and thank you for your time. And I will hand us back to Finley.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for your time and your energy today and your insight. This has been fantastic. I'd like to thank The Started for producing this podcast and all our members for taking part. Our last podcast was on the ethics of AI, and This has been about how to release and record music. So obviously it's very wide ranging in topics and it's all member led. And since that podcast, we've had many new members, from Vento Insurance to Bitwig, which is a digital audio workstation, to Skiddle Tickets, and some of the labels that we've heard from today. So all these new members, they're invited to be involved in our initiatives. They can listen to the group calls, or they can come to education sessions, a bit like this, or just be connected with members to explore new business opportunities, which we'll be doing by invite-only events all this spring and summer through various conferences across the world. So we invite everyone to be a member and get involved. This podcast has been around the business of releasing music, but we're also looking to provide support for social and cultural issues. We have recently partnered with the University of Groningen to conduct a research project into burnout in the electronic music industry. So we'd encourage everyone, whether you're a member or not, and whether you're an artist or an industry professional, to head over to our profile on LinkedIn and Instagram, where you can complete an anonymous survey, which will really help us to quantify the extent and nature of burnout in the industry, and also what we can do to support each other as peers and provide that support for everyone, whether you're an artist or a professional. So if you're involved in the business of electronic music, whether you're a one-person startup, a mid-sized business, or a large established company, we want to hear from you and we want you to get involved. So please drop us an email at membership@afem.org.net. And thanks again to our lovely panel for all their insights today. And thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.